The São Paulo winter night was unforgiving, its cold breath pressing against the gilded windows of the luxury hotel. Inside, a different kind of chill permeated the air, one that no amount of champagne or golden light could warm. It was a charity gala, a grand performance of philanthropy where the city's elite gathered to celebrate their own generosity. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sound of clinking crystal, a symphony of success that felt hollow to its core. Laughter echoed through the opulent ballroom, but it was brittle, rehearsed, a sound meant to fill the vast empty spaces between people. Every smile was a transaction, every handshake a negotiation. It was a world built on glittering surfaces, a carefully constructed illusion of warmth and connection that only served to highlight the profound loneliness that lay just beneath. Helena stood near a towering floral arrangement, a silent observer in a world she had conquered. At 48, she was the CEO of one of Latin America's largest construction firms, a woman whose name was synonymous with power. Her couture dress was a whisper of dark silk, her jewelry understated yet priceless, her posture an unyielding column of control. She was a fortress, impeccably assembled and impenetrable. Yet, behind the flawless mask, her eyes held a decade-old sorrow, a permanent winter that had settled in her soul the day her son disappeared. The noise of the gala became a dull roar, the superficiality suffocating her. She needed air, real air, not this recycled atmosphere of pretense. With a quiet, almost imperceptible movement, she slipped away from the crowd, seeking refuge from the weight of her own empire. The marble steps outside were cold and stark, a welcome shock to her system. The distant hum of the city was a more honest sound than the forced gaiety she had left behind. It was there, huddled against a grand pillar, that she saw him. A small boy, no older than 10, sat alone, drawing invisible patterns on the stone with a fingertip. His clothes were worn and too large for his thin frame, but they were clean, a small testament to a resilience that defied his circumstances. His face was smudged with dirt, but his eyes, when he briefly looked up, were a startling, intelligent blue. He hugged his knees to his chest, a small figure against the immense, indifferent facade of the hotel. For Helena, the image was a physical blow, a vision of the very vulnerability she had failed to protect her own child from. She didn't think, she simply moved, an instinct long dormant stirring within her. She didn't reach for her purse to offer money, an act that would have been an insult to the quiet dignity of the boy's solitude. Instead, she sat on the step a few feet away, sharing the cold and the silence with him. The world of the gala, with its noise and its demands, faded into a distant memory. For a long moment, they just existed there, two lost souls in the São Paulo night. Then, the boy turned his head, his gaze direct and devoid of pity or expectation. He looked at the powerful CEO in her designer gown, a woman who seemingly had everything, and spoke in a soft, clear voice that cut through 10 years of her grief. "Are you lost too?" he asked. And with those 4 simple words, the armor Helena had spent a decade building shattered into 1,000 pieces. The warmth of the nearby coffee shop was a world away from the cold marble steps. Helena led the boy, who introduced himself as Leo, to a small table by the window. Steam from his cup of hot chocolate fogged the glass, momentarily blurring the harsh city lights. He held the mug with both hands, as if absorbing its heat into his very bones, his startling blue eyes wide with a mixture of caution and wonder. Helena watched him, the powerful CEO facade melting away with each sip he took. She was no longer a captain of industry in a couture gown. She was just a woman, sitting across from a child who was impossibly alone. The clatter of cutlery and the low murmur of conversations around them felt more real, more human, than the entire hollow spectacle of the gala. For the first time in years, she wasn't performing. She was simply present, anchored by the quiet gravity of the small boy in front of her. He spoke about his life on the streets, not with the drama of a victim, but with the detached clarity of a seasoned survivor. He described the shifting alliances between the other children, the constant search for a dry place to sleep, and the looming presence of a man who collected their meager earnings at the end of each day. When Helena gently asked about his parents, he just shrugged, his gaze dropping to the table. "I don't remember them," he said, the words so simple, so devoid of self-pity, that they struck her with the force of a physical blow. In that instant, a fierce, protective instinct ignited within her. It was a feeling she had buried a decade ago, a maternal fire she thought had been extinguished forever by the cold ashes of her grief. It roared back to life, white-hot and absolute, with a single, undeniable purpose: to shield this child from the world's indifference. The thought of returning him to that cold, predatory existence was not just unpleasant, it was a moral impossibility. It felt like a betrayal of some sacred, unspoken promise. Her mind, usually a fortress of logic and strategic planning, was silent. This decision came from a deeper place, a primal core that had been awakened by 4 simple words on a cold stone step. She looked at Leo, who was now carefully drawing a smiley face in the condensation on the window, and a profound certainty settled over her. She would not take him to a shelter. She would not hand him over to a faceless system. She would take him home. It was an irrational, reckless, and life-altering decision made in the span of a single heartbeat. It was the first decision in 10 years that wasn't about her business or her loss, but about a future. Bringing Leo into her sterile, meticulously ordered penthouse was like introducing a wildflower into a climate-controlled laboratory. The silence of the vast apartment was broken by the soft scuff of his worn sneakers on the polished hardwood floors. Her housekeeper, Maria, a woman who had been with her for 2 decades and had witnessed the slow hollowing of her soul, looked on with a mixture of shock and a flicker of something that might have been hope. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Helena ignored the silent judgment, her focus entirely on the small boy who stared, wide-eyed, at a ceiling that seemed as high as the sky. She felt the carefully constructed walls of her world begin to tremble, and for the first time, she welcomed the chaos. This disruption, this intrusion of life, was the very thing her empty empire had been starving for. That first night, Leo was shown to a guest room larger than any space he had ever inhabited. It had a bed with a mountain of soft pillows and a window with a breathtaking view of the glittering city. Yet when Helena went to check on him hours later, she found him asleep on the floor, curled up on a small rug at the foot of the bed. The instinct for hard, solid ground was more comforting to him than the unfamiliar softness of a mattress. The sight broke her heart all over again. She gently lifted him, his small, thin body surprisingly light, and placed him in the bed, pulling the covers up to his chin. As she watched him sleep, the moonlight tracing the smudge of dirt still on his cheek, she felt a terrifying wave of affection, a feeling so potent it felt like a risk. The next morning, the real battle began. Her lawyers were summoned, their faces a mask of professional concern as they explained the monumental legal hurdles. Adopting a child with no records, no known history, was a bureaucratic nightmare. Social services would launch an invasive investigation into her life, her past, her motivations. They saw her as a powerful, grieving woman making an impulsive, emotional decision. Every question was laced with suspicion, every form a barrier. The immense power and influence she wielded in the corporate world meant nothing here. She could build skyscrapers that touched the clouds, but she was powerless against the cold, grinding machinery of a system designed to distrust the very human impulse she had followed. It's in these moments of helplessness, when the system fails the individual, that we realize how much we need stories of hope to keep going. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe. It allows us to continue sharing them. As the days turned into weeks, Helena found herself fighting a war on two fronts. The external battle was with the legal system, but the internal one was far more brutal. Every moment of connection with Leo was shadowed by the ghost of her son, Lucas. When Leo laughed at a cartoon, she heard an echo of Lucas's giggle. When he asked a question with innocent curiosity, she saw her own son's inquisitive face. The small joys were immediately followed by waves of suffocating guilt. Was she trying to replace him? Was it fair to Leo to be a stand-in for a ghost? She would find herself pulling back emotionally, creating a distance to protect her own fragile heart, terrified that loving this new boy was a betrayal of the one she had lost. The mansion became a mausoleum of memory, each room filled with a silent, internal struggle. Yet Leo, with the quiet resilience of one who has seen the worst of humanity, slowly began to dismantle her defenses. He didn't demand affection or push for a connection. He simply existed in her space, a calm and steady presence. One evening, he found her on the balcony, staring blankly at the city. He came and stood beside her, pointing up at the night sky. He began to name the constellations, his soft voice explaining the Greek myths he'd learned from a tattered book he once found. Orion the hunter, Cassiopeia the queen. He was sharing the only thing he had ever truly owned, the stars. In that shared silence, under the vast, indifferent sky, Helena felt a bond form that had nothing to do with Lucas. It was new, it was fragile, and it was entirely for Leo. Just as a fragile sense of normalcy began to take root, the outside world intruded with venomous force. A man named Carlos, the same one who had exploited Leo and the other children, tracked them down. He didn't use overt violence. His weapon was manipulation. He appeared outside her office one day, his smile greasy and his eyes cold, making a veiled threat about going to the press. He spoke of reuniting with his lost boy unless a substantial payment was made. The threat was clear. He would paint her as a kidnapper, a rich woman who stole a poor child, and destroy the fragile adoption process. The safety she had tried to build around Leo was suddenly under siege, threatened by the very darkness she had pulled him from. The Helena of 10 years ago might have paid him, throwing money at the problem to make it disappear. But this was a different woman, one forged in the fires of loss and now animated by a fierce, protective love. She met Carlos's threats not with fear, but with the cold, unyielding power she was known for in the boardroom. She recorded their conversations, had her security team compile a detailed dossier on his activities, and turned everything over to the authorities. She moved with quiet, lethal efficiency, erecting a legal fortress around Leo so impenetrable that Carlos and his threats simply dissolved against it. She did all of this without Leo ever knowing, shielding him from the ugliness, fighting a silent war on his behalf. Her empire, once a monument to her pain, had become his shield. This confrontation, this act of fierce protection, became her internal turning point. The fear she felt when Carlos threatened to take Leo away was a living, breathing terror, as real and as potent as the old, stagnant grief she carried for Lucas. In that moment of crisis, the distinction between the two boys blurred not into a replacement, but into a singular, powerful emotion, a mother's love. She realized she wasn't betraying Lucas by loving Leo. She was honoring the love she still had for her lost son by giving it to a child who desperately needed it. The guilt didn't vanish, but it receded, making way for a courageous, terrifying, and liberating acceptance. And if you've ever felt a moment that changes everything, you know how powerful that feeling is. Supporting our channel by subscribing helps us capture and share more of these transformative human experiences. With the immediate threat neutralized, a fragile peace settled over the household. The legal process continued its slow, methodical march, but inside the penthouse, a family was beginning to form. Helena began tutoring Leo herself, discovering a bright, inquisitive mind that had been starved of knowledge. They established small routines, reading a chapter of a book before bed, cooking breakfast together on weekends, arguing playfully over what movie to watch. The vast, silent rooms of the apartment, once filled with the ghosts of what was lost, now echoed with new sounds. Leo's laughter, the murmur of their conversations, the simple, comforting noise of life being lived. Helena watched as the haunted, guarded look in the boy's blue eyes was slowly replaced by the light of security and trust. It was not a replacement for her past, but a brave, hopeful step into a new future. The legal system, for all its methodical slowness, had finally granted her provisional custody. It was a victory on paper, a fragile permission slip to continue what her heart had already decided. One evening, the air in the bathroom was thick with the warm haze of steam from Leo's bath. Helena was helping him dry off, a simple domestic act that felt both foreign and profoundly right. As she gently dabbed the towel behind his right ear, her hand froze. There, against his damp skin, was a small, perfect crescent moon, a birthmark she knew as well as her own reflection. It was a ghost of a memory, a detail she had forced herself to forget because remembering was too painful. It was Lucas's mark, a jolt of impossible recognition, so powerful it threatened to buckle her knees, shot through her. Hope, she realized, was a far more terrifying emotion than grief. For the next 2 days, Helena moved like a phantom in her own home, her mind a whirlwind of calculation and prayer. She could not voice this impossible suspicion, could not risk shattering the boy's fragile new world or her own, with a hope that might be a cruel coincidence. She needed certainty. So, with the cold precision of a CEO executing a high-stakes merger, she planned her next move. In the dead of night, she crept into his room, her heart pounding a deafening rhythm against her ribs. He was asleep, his face peaceful in the moonlight. With a trembling hand, she gently swabbed the inside of his cheek, a thief stealing the one thing that could either condemn her to her grief forever or deliver her from it. It was a desperate, silent act, a mother's gamble against a decade of impossible odds. The waiting was a unique form of torture, a purgatory of silence where every passing minute felt like an eternity. She threw herself into her work, but the numbers on her spreadsheets were meaningless, the meetings a distant buzz. Then the email arrived. It sat in her inbox, the subject line a string of cold, clinical words from the genetics lab. She stared at it from the sterile solitude of her high-rise office. The city, sprawling beneath her like a map of a life that no longer felt real. Her entire empire, the skyscrapers she had built as monuments to her loss, felt like a pile of dust compared to the weight of the information contained in that single digital message. With a breath that felt like her last, she moved the cursor and clicked, opening the file that held the verdict on her life. The words appeared on the screen, stark and absolute. Maternity compatibility, 99.999%. The numbers blurred as a wave of hot tears finally broke free, not the slow, cold tears of grief she had grown accustomed to, but a flood of raw, unbridled release. It was the sound of a dam breaking after 10 years of relentless pressure. A sob tore from her throat, a sound of such profound liberation that it seemed to shake the very foundations of her glass and steel fortress. She wasn't a grieving mother who had found a replacement. She was a mother who had found her son. It is in these single, earth-shattering moments that we witness the true power of the human spirit to endure. If you believe that stories of such impossible hope deserve to be told, your subscription helps us bring them to light. She didn't run. She walked, her steps steady and sure for the first time in a decade, as if she were finally remembering how to inhabit her own body. She found him in the living room, building a lopsided tower with a set of wooden blocks. He looked up and smiled, a simple, trusting expression that she now saw with entirely new eyes. She knelt before him and, without a word, pulled him into an embrace. It was not a hug of comfort or affection. It was an act of reclamation. She held him with a strength that was both fierce and fragile, burying her face in his hair, breathing in the scent of him, feeling the solid, living reality of his small frame in her arms, in that silent, desperate embrace, and 10 lost years collapsed into a single, perfect moment. Leo, her Lucas, was home. The legal process that followed was a quiet formality, a matter of paperwork to correct a decade-old cosmic error. The world saw it as the adoption of Leo by a benevolent tycoon. But for Helena, it was the reclamation of Lucas, the official restoration of her own heart. She began the slow, deliberate process of dismantling the empire she had built as a shield. Board meetings were replaced with parent-teacher conferences. Blueprints for skyscrapers gave way to helping with homework at the kitchen table. She didn't abandon her company, but she delegated its soul, entrusting the day-to-day operations to others, while she undertook the most important construction project of her life, rebuilding the world for her son. The vast penthouse, once a silent testament to loss, was now filled with the simple, sacred sounds of a family rediscovering its rhythm, a quiet symphony of second chances. The transformation was not confined to the walls of her home. Helena, who had once moved mountains of concrete and steel, now moved her focus to a different kind of foundation. She liquidated a significant portion of her assets and established the Recommissar Foundation, an organization with a dual, deeply personal mission. It would leverage cutting-edge technology and a network of private investigators to find missing children, offering other families the hope she had been denied for so long. Simultaneously, it would create safe houses and educational programs for children on the streets, ensuring that no child like the one Lucas had been forced to become would be left invisible. Her wealth, once a means of insulating herself from pain, was now a tool to heal the world, a testament to the idea that her true legacy would not be written in skylines, but in reunited families. Years later, on a warm spring afternoon, Helena and Lucas, now a thoughtful teenager, stood in the very park where he had disappeared. The place was no longer a ghost. It was just a park, filled with the laughter of children playing on new equipment funded by their foundation. A short distance away, a young mother, her face streaked with tears of joy, was embracing a small child who had just been found through a Recommissar alert. Lucas put his arm around his mother's shoulders, a simple gesture of shared understanding. He had few clear memories of his time on the streets, the trauma mercifully blurred by years of safety and love, but he understood the meaning of this place. He understood the circle they had closed, turning the site of their deepest pain into a beacon of hope for others. They watched the reunited family, not as saviors, but as quiet witnesses to a miracle they had helped set in motion. Helena's life was no longer about power or control, but about purpose. The emptiness that had haunted her for a decade was filled not just with the presence of her son, but with the profound peace that comes from turning personal tragedy into collective triumph. They had not just found each other, they had found a new way to live, proving that even after the longest, coldest winter, the human heart has an infinite capacity for a new beginning. We are so grateful to be able to share these journeys of resilience with you, and every new subscriber gives us the strength to continue finding and telling stories that remind us of the enduring power of hope.